Were the Nazis really socialists? Was the National Socialist Party of Germany a socialist party? Well, it's time to fact check the fact checkers on this. Here is Glenn Kessler, who's the fact checker of the Washington Post. And he's evaluating a statement by Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm going to start by quoting Marjorie Taylor Greene. She says, Nazis were the National Socialist Party, just like the Democrats are now a National Socialist Party. Boom. And by the way, completely accurate. And Kessler now takes this on, and he goes, I'm now quoting him. The official name of Adolf Hitler's political party, the Nazis, had the word socialist in it. It's kind of like it just happened to have that word in there. He goes, ergo, it must have been a socialist party. Now, first of all, the case for the Nazis being socialists doesn't hinge solely on the name. It is, of course, the case that there are groups that name themselves in a way that is misleading, deceptive, propagandistic. Consider the German Democratic Republic, for example. It's the GDR, that's the old Soviet bloc, was not democratic, but they wanted to make it seem like they were. The Islamic Republic of Iran is not really a republic in any meaningful sense of the term, but they want to appropriate the kind of moral force of the idea of a republic. But let's remember that these are dictatorial governments that are doing this for propaganda purposes. The difference, by the way, with the Nazis is that the Nazis were campaigning as a political party. They were trying to win elections, and so they're going to want to describe themselves, certainly not in a way opposite to what they stand for. Why? Because they want people to understand what side of the aisle they're on. Now, I'm coming back to Glenn Kessler. He goes, it was not a socialist party and cannot be compared, either in the United States or Europe, to today's socialists for Pinocchios. So completely false. Now, I want to give 4 counter-arguments to this that suggest that far from it being completely false, it is arguably true and most likely true, and in my view, it is true. Number 1, look at the Nazi platform. State control of education, state control of the banks, state control of healthcare, state control of religious institutions. So this concept of concentrated state power is essentially a working definition of socialism. Everything in the state, nothing outside the state. This was a fascist slogan that was fully embraced by the Nazis. Number 2, the Nazi newspapers were full of praise. This is going back to when FDR was first elected in 1932, took office in 1933. The Volkischer Beobachter, the other Nazi papers, they all recognized the New Deal as on the left. As being leaning in the socialist direction, and they praised it for that reason. They said that these New Dealers are socialists like we are. So they saw the affinity between Nazism and American progressivism. That's point number 2. Point number 3, a number of progressives, leftists, and socialists in America saw their affinity with Nazism. Case in point, the great black writer W.E.B. Du Bois. He actually visited Germany in the late 1930s, around 1937, I believe. He was full of praise for how wonderfully the Nazis had organized their society. He even made a certain kind of defense of anti-Semitism, implying that the Nazis were kind of straightening out these Jews whom he identified as quintessential capitalists. And this is the key point. Even Nazi anti-Semitism. Glenn Kessler says, no, these people weren't really socialists. Many of the things that they said against the banks and so on were just part of their anti-Semitism. But the point is that part of the reason for the Nazis being anti-Semites is they identified the Jews as the quintessential capitalists, as the people who dominated, for example, the German equivalent of Wall Street. They were involved in what Hitler himself called finance capitalism. And 4th, the left here is also anti-Semitic. I mean, just look at the recent conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and look at the anti-Semitic rhetoric coming out of the left. Look at the physical attacks on Orthodox Jews in cities. Look at the temperature of the accusations against Israel. The idea that I recently saw one of these left-wing socialists saying, the Jews have a natural proclivity to war. So this demonization of the Jews, this use of kind of age-old anti-Semitic tropes and caricatures, we saw that from the Nazis. They sort of perfected it in the 1930s. And now we see it again in America, coming from which side of the aisle? Not from the right, but from the left. Look up yourself the Nazi 25-point platform and ask yourself, is this a platform that's more likely to be embraced by Donald Trump or by Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, Ilhan Omar, that whole gang. Glenn Kessler has no idea what he's talking about, or maybe he has some idea. Maybe he himself has been recruited into what Hitler himself termed the big lie.